Okay, so let's look at CAPP 60-33. Open it up to page 58. Follow along with me, starting at paragraph 5-3. It all starts with the first sergeant. All right, so the first sergeant is going to initiate the squadron inline formation. And he's going to position himself or herself 9 paces from where they want the center of that formation. And that spacing or position is from the first element. Okay? So he wants to center himself, or she wants to center herself. And bear in mind, they have to anticipate the amount of ground that the squadron will occupy, so to make sure there's no obstacles in the way or hazards. He or she will then command fall in. All right. At this point, the guides go into position. The important thing with the guides is they're basically establishing where your flights are located at. The guides are going to be to the far right of your flights, and they have to make sure there's 3 paces between them and the neighboring flight. Now, that position you see on the bottom left is actually an anticipated position for the flight sergeant. Once the command post is given and the flight commanders will take charge, the first sergeant will be occupying that position. So that's pretty much where that 3-pace place needs to be initiated at. All right, flight sergeants will fall in, and they should be 3 paces from where their first element is on each of their flights. And then there we go. Those horizontal rectangles indicate elements, and to the far right of those, you see a square box with a cross in the center of it. That would be your element leader. Of course, the element leaders will fall into the far right of the formation. They should be the first ones there, and of course, their elements will fall into the left of them. And as you fall in, you'll have your arm straight out to the side until the person to your left falls into you, and once they fall into you and they're aligned with you, then you drop your arm. Now, it's assumed whenever the first sergeant calls fall in that it's going to be at regular interval. If the first sergeant says instead fall in at close interval, then instead of extending your arm straight out, you're going to put your left hand on your hip, and then that person's going to guide on your left elbow, and then once they're dressed and covered, you'll drop your elbow or drop your arm. Okay, then the flight sergeants are going to initiate by saying report. Now, by CAPP 60-33, the alpha flight or the far right flight will initiate report. Okay, they will say it first, and then it will be said in sequence, probably from the next flight, Bravo, Charlie, and so forth. And then each of the element leaders are going to report. Now, this is how you report. You basically extend a hand salute, and you basically give this report. In this case, you're going to say first element all present. If they're all present. If there's somebody absent, then you're going to say first element 3 persons absent in the case that 3 people are actually absent. All right. The important thing is also the element leader does not look at the flight sergeant. He or she looks straight forward. Okay. And the flight sergeant does not initiate a hand salute back until after the report is given. The element leader is going to hold their salute until the flight sergeant drops their salute. And we start with the first element, we work our way back. Okay, there's the flight sergeant exchanging the salute after the report was given. And then we have the second element, again, same thing. Third element, and then of course finally the fourth element. Okay, so you know who you have in formation. All right, now the flight sergeant's doing about face. The first sergeant says report. Again, starting with the right flight or the alpha flight, the flight sergeant turns to face the first sergeant. And of course, you're going to do a military execution turn professionally, not just bend in that direction. And then they give off this. This is their report. Again, they start off with initiating a hand salute, and they'll say blank flight, in this case alpha flight, all present or accounted for, unless somebody's missing. And then of course they're going to say alpha flight, 3 persons absent. Okay? The first sergeant then at the end of the report gives a hand salute, and then of course when he or she drops their salute, then the then the flight sergeant that's reported will drop their salute. Then that flight sergeant will turn back straight forward, again performing a military execution as far as turning. Same thing with all the concurrent flights. They turn to face the first sergeant, they give the report. Of course, they start that with a hand salute, and then they give the report. There we go, the first sergeant gives a hand salute back after the report is said. And then, of course, the flight sergeant will turn back in a straightforward direction. Now, the first sergeant will say, post. The flight sergeants at this juncture will do an about face. And they will move to that position I talked about earlier, right? To the back left position of each of their flights. The reason we do it like this is not because we like to add in all this formality, although granted that's some of it. Non-commissioned officers are responsible for the accountability of personnel, all right? And before you start the duty day off or the meeting or the event, you need to show that you have accountability of all your people. And this is why this is done like this, okay? So before the first sergeant can hand over the squadron to the commander, he has to show that they have accountability. Now, the first sergeant does an about face, and then the squadron commander comes up. The squadron commander positions him or herself 12 paces from the front rank or element of the flights. And that, of course, will be about 3 paces from the first sergeant. The first sergeant salutes. At the point that the first sergeant salutes, the flight commanders will step into position. Okay? Then the first sergeant will say, sir, ma'am, all present or accounted for, or sir or ma'am, 3 persons absent. Now, after the first sergeant drops his salute, after the squadron commander, after the first sergeant drops his salute, the flight commanders will move into position. And they are 6 paces in front of the flights. Again, remember, the flight sergeants are only 3 paces. All right? The first sergeant does an about face and then marches off. Okay? Positioning him or herself to the back left of the formation.